Okay. First question I ask everybody is give me your first and last name, and again, use a complete sentence because you will never hear the sound of my voice. What's your first and last name?
My name is Celestine Bray Bottoms.
Okay, now where did you go to college and what year did you graduate?
I went to Spelman College and here in Atlanta, Georgia, and I graduated in 1960.
Now, this whole interview is about the student civil rights movement then. You were at the very beginning. Tell me who was involved. Tell me one of your most outstanding memories.
The students who were involved came from Morehouse, Spelman, some from Clark, Atlanta, and a few from Morris Brown. I was there in the very beginning when they would call for people to come to Morehouse College where we met. I believe it was Sale Hall. And they would tell what was happening, what was going on in the city, if they were planning marches, why they were going to march. They would ask for people to volunteer to march and to go and do different things. And depending on how involved you wanted to be, you had the chance to do that. So I went on several marches that were very peaceful. I made sure they were very peaceful because I have never been able to run, and I didn't want to get sidetracked. But I painted signs. We had people who painted signs. There's some people who carried signs when we marched. But when we did march downtown, and I did go on several peaceful ones. We had to go two abreast. We had to stop at the red light. We had to follow all the traffic rules and regulations. And as a matter of fact, the first time I ever realized that newspapers lie was one march we went on, and there were maybe 150, maybe 100, maybe less than that. And we had to go two abreast, had to stop at the red light and all, and we were told we couldn't talk or we had to just go straight. But the newspaper said there were 2,500 marches, screaming, shouting, cursing, students going through Atlanta today. And that we didn't have 2,500 people in the AU Center. So they lied about that. We were so peaceful going through, a lot of people didn't even know we were demonstrating. The second march, one of the main things I really remember was Dr. Howard Zinn was my instructor at Spelman College. He was my major instructor in political science and social studies. And we went to City Hall, we went to the state legislature, and we went to observe the legislature in action. And when we went, we sat upstairs. We sat upstairs in the gallery, and he sat with us. And I remember the Speaker of the House looked up. He said to the guard, "Mr. Guard, get those niggers out of the gallery up there." And everybody downstairs turned around and looked up at us. And we were wondering, why are they looking? He said, "Get those niggers out of there. Get that white man away from them. And he can't sit with them." So we were there, Zen was our instructor, Dr. Zen was our instructor, and we didn't know that we were breaking the law. But what I didn't realize then that I now know, that was a part of the movement. That was a planned thing. So when we got up, we came out, the cameras up there, and they took pictures of us leaving the gallery. And we were walking, looking, and wondering what all these cameras about. And they stopped Dr. Zen and he said, "I can't leave my students." Because we had like maybe 10 girls from Spelman and 4 guys from Morehouse, because we took class at Morehouse and some at Spelman. And when they were taking our pictures, and he said, "No," they said, "You can't sit over there. They can't be up here. You can't sit with them." He said, "No, I can't leave them." So it really caused a big stir, and that made the newspapers. And I'm wondering, well, what is that all about? But I didn't think anything about it then, but as I have aged, and now that I know how political movements start, that was all planned. they knew when we went down there, he was a part of the movement. Dr. Howard Zinn was. He was an advisor, so they knew when we went what was going to happen, but we didn't know. So it was a very exciting time.
Okay, change up your shot, if you would, please. Okay. One of the things that we talk about is when we have these markers, we have 14 of them. 2 of them are already in place, and the other 14 are going to be at places like Pickwick and Riches and Rush Memorial. But you actually said that you started in 1959.
Yes.
And so some of the things that we're going to memorialize, they happened after you left. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes, some of them did.
Okay. Tell me what were the major marches that you remember, and then 1959. That's even before it's on the books. What could take place in 1959?
Oh, no, listen. That was when we went over to the meetings and they would ask for people to, who would march. Then they would, as different people came to the meetings, they would say, well, we need some people who would go and demonstrate, and they might go to jail. So they would define and explain what was going to happen. Those people who were more daring would volunteer. And they would go and do these different things. And when they chose to, like my best friend at that time, who's dead now, Lucille Brown McIver, volunteered. And they knew they were going to jail. But, so they would take them, and they would go off and they would go together, and they would talk to them about being nonviolent. You had to be nonviolent. And they would say, you know, if you don't think you can't take the pressure, you can't do this, you cannot hit you, it must be nonviolent. So if you can't do that, then don't stay for the next meeting. And then they would go and go and go, and then after those meetings, they would get maybe 6 or 7 people who could really do that. And they would teach them about, you must be strong. They would teach them to depend on the others. And when things were happening, when somebody said something to you, very mean to you, then everybody there would zero in and hold this person's eyes. And they communicated with the eyes, nonverbal communication. And they gave them the strength to stand up and to say nothing, to do nothing.
Okay, what we're going to do is zoom in on your eyes. Do you remember that look?
This is the closest you get. I would have to get it. I mean.
Okay, then later we'll come back and do
Make sure
it.
we got mom
We'll do it
lenses,
back later. I'm working with him for the first time, and he's like, "What are you asking?"
Oh, no,
for?"
no.
You know. But have you ever had to use that look later in your life?
As a teacher, I have. As a teacher, you know, you look directly at the person, and you send them nonverbal messages. You know, there's a look of strength, and there's a look of love.
And you do both so well.
Yes.
How did the movement change you? Now you left in 1961. Why did you leave, and what happened afterwards?
I graduated and started teaching. 1960 was my first year teaching. So at that time, I was engaged to a young man who was in the movement, John Gibson. And they started, I think it was the Atlanta Voice, the newspaper. And they used to, they wrote the articles and they ran it off on the mimeograph machine. But I did not march or participate in any more active things like that, because had I done that, I would have lost my job. My mother was employed by the Atlanta Public Schools. So there were people who were there before. And then when we started working, we couldn't take an active role because we had worked and I was in my profession. So I would go to the Atlanta Voice office and run the voice off by mimeograph, and they would staple it together, and that was the Atlanta Voice is in circulation today, and that was started by the movement.
Okay, the Atlanta Voice or the Atlanta Inquirer?
Which one was
It's
it?
with the Inquirer.
It's the Atlanta Inquirer.
Okay, so let's do that whole thing, and let's
Okay.
say what you used to do for the Atlanta Inquirer.
Okay, the Atlanta Inquirer, when they started, the students wrote the articles and they started. And the guy who was the professor who worked with them then was his nickname was Box. He taught at Clark. He and his wife were very involved with the students then. And I would go when I finished after school was over, and I would do my lessons and check, and then I would go up there and I would run off. I would run off the paper on the mimeograph machine. The first printing was on mimeograph, and I would run off the mimeograph machine, and people put it together and then they put it out. But it's still in circulation in Atlanta Inquirer, and that's the way it started.
Okay, now when we talk about movement tactics, after you left, did you see it evolve into something more? Were you with Lonnie King? Were you with Julian Bond during that time? Or was it just kind of like whoever was available stepped up to be the leader?
No, not that I remember. Lonnie and Julian were the leaders, and Frank Holloway, who was my high school classmate and my college classmate, was a part of it. And I see him from time to time now. But they were the leaders. They were the ones who put it together. Albert Brinson, Reverend Dr. Albert Brinson, was a part of it. And one of my very best friends, Herschel Sullivan Challenor, she went away to Europe and came back, and she was there a year after we left, and she was a part of it. My other best friend, Rosalind Pope, was a leader, and they were the ones who actually put the things together. But the people who actually went out and did the marches and did the work they were leaders, but they were the ones. Lonnie and Rosalind and Julian were the ones who really put it together, and the other people were the ones who carried out their plans.
Now, you made a statement earlier, keep the same shot, that there were about 2,500 people on the Clark Atlanta campus. Was that the maximum number of folks that ever participated in the movement while you were there? I mean, what were the numbers?
No, what I'm saying to you is that the newspaper said that there were 2,500 screaming, cursing, marching, singing, students going through town demonstrating. There were not 2,500 people on the campuses. Spelman had maybe 500 people. Morehouse had maybe 500. And we're talking about all total. All four of the schools together didn't have 2,500 people in all four of the schools. But not everybody participated. So that was a lie. That was the first time I realized that newspapers lie. You know, I used to think that what was on the front page was right, and it was all and all this, and that's not true. You can't read everything, believe everything you see in print. But I didn't until I realized, you know, as I got older and more educated and started really thinking about what I was reading, then some of the stuff did not make sense. But that was really the first time I had ever actually seen a real lie.
Well, how many students participated, off the top of your head, proportion-wise? I know that there were a lot of women from Spelman that from the beginning participated in the student movement.
I would say maybe approximately 40 or 50, which was pretty good because, see, my freshman class had less than 200.
Okay, so put all that sentence together.
My freshman class had less than 200. This is what I'm saying. We were like 150 in one class, so maybe 75 or 75 out of that class graduated.
Okay, we have to say that again because that ring was in there. Mr. Brinson, I'm going to ask you. Oh, okay, great. Okay, one more time. I'm so very sorry. So how many people were in your freshman class, and then how many people do you remember participating?
I guess there might have been maybe 150.
Okay, give me that complete sentence.
Yes. There might have been 150 in my freshman class, maybe less than that, and fewer than 25 or 30 of them participated, because a lot of people then, as now, you know, people were afraid and didn't go out, and we had people's mothers were calling from out of town, don't you dare go out there and do that, you know, I don't have any money to get you out of jail, and you better not go. And some people were afraid because people actually got hurt online. You know, people were injured. That's John Gibson I was telling you about led a demonstration around Woolworths downtown, and a woman came up to him and took her shoe and dug her shoe into his foot and made a hole. And he died with that wound. He's been dead for some time now, but she actually made a big hole in his foot. He could not do a thing but stand there and look, and tears ran down his face. And when that demonstration was over, they took him to Grady, and he wore a bandage on his foot for the longest. And I'm sure he's been dead for some time, but I'm sure he had that wound on him as long as he died. People were hurt on those lines. They spat at him, they pinched him, they did all kinds of things on the picket lines, and when they did demonstrate.
Now, you told me a story, change up my shot, and then as she talks, give me a slow zoom, that you and John Gibson were close, okay, and he was a leader in the movement, but Klan scared the living daylights out of him. He made you stop riding in his car.
Yes.
Okay, now tell me why, and then tell me about why your mama sat up at her door with a shotgun.
John Gibson and James Felder. I think his first name is James. I think he's dead now. But I found out about what happened with him at the years ago when the students got together for a reunion, and I sat at a table with him. But John had bought a car. Most people didn't have cars then, but he bought a car, and people rode in the car, and they would go to things in the car, and also he would come and pick me up, and I would ride with him. But it got so dangerous, they started following him. Lonnie King, John, and the guys who had cars. Different people started following them. And at that time, it looked like maybe it might have been the police were involved in it. They were stopping to all kinds of things. But one night, about 2 o'clock, he was coming down Westview Drive. And I lived on Fair Street over 1 block over. And he was coming over the hill. The Ku Klux were after him in this car. And he pulled his car up in a driveway, in a yard, after coming over the hill on Westview Drive, jumped out of the car, came across the railroad underground, and came through the streets up Westview Drive, up to the next street up. And he came up behind the shrubbery for the houses, and came all the way up there, and came up Fair Street with the shrubbery up to my house. My house was on a hill. The other houses were down. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, I heard my mama say, "What? Who is it?" I was asleep. I was working. I was teaching at the time. And she said, "All right." So she got up, and she went and she said, "John is at the door." So I'm wondering, why is he at my door at 2 o'clock in the morning? And he told her, said, "Miss Bray, the Ku Klux are after me. Open the door and let me in. Don't turn on the lights." So my mother said, we went to the door, and he said, "Don't turn on the lights." And he was just trembling. And so he came in,